Hi, I'm Jim Thane. This spring, I'm the writer-in-residence at the Apache Junction Public Library, and I also write a series of mystery novels set in the Valley featuring a Phoenix homicide detective named Sean Richardson. This is the second in a series of podcasts discussing mystery novels set in Arizona. As in the first podcast, in this edition we'll be talking about several books that span the spectrum of the crime genre. And first up is a beautifully written book, The Killer is Dying, by James Salas. This is by no means a traditional mystery novel, although there is a criminal, a contract killer for hire named Christian, at the heart of the book, and, as the title suggests, the killer is dying. Although seriously ill, Christian has taken one last assignment. His target is an unassuming man who works in the office of an insurance company in downtown Phoenix. Christian scouts the man, learning his patterns, and then, just as he is about to strike, somebody beats him to the punch and shoots his intended target. Totally confused, Christian stands outside the building watching as the ambulance screams away, taking the victim to the hospital. Christian is amazed by the coincidence that someone else would shoot the target just as he was closing in on him. But how could this possibly be a coincidence, and what could be going on here? Although he doesn't know for sure what's happening, Christian feels a professional obligation to complete the assignment and must now figure out how to get at the target, who is hospitalized in an ICU. Meanwhile, as a man who has always lived a solitary life, Christian must deal alone with his own illness and confront his inevitable mortality. The second principal character in the novel is a police detective named Sales, who is assigned to investigate the shooting and who ultimately winds up tracking Christian. However, as he does, Sales is confronting his own existential dilemma. His wife, Josie, is deathly ill, and with no warning has left him to die in a hospice without even saying goodbye. One day when he left for work in the morning, she was there. When he got home that night, she was gone, leaving only a note begging Sales not to try to find her, but to let her die in peace. Inevitably, of course, the poor man is gutted by the experience and must now try to figure out how to confront the new realities of his life. He decides to honor his wife's wishes, but only up to a point. He tracks her to the hospice where she is dying, but does not attempt to contact her. Rather, he parks outside of the place at night just to be near her. Sales's partner, a detective named Graves, will try to give him the support and the space to work through this crisis, but for the first time in his life, Sales is, in many ways, completely alone. The final character in the story is a young boy named Jimmy, who has been abandoned by his parents, first by his mother and then by his father. Jimmy is still living in the house that they shared, forging his parents' signatures to checks in order to pay the bills. He's earning a little money by buying and selling things online, and he's desperately trying to prevent the authorities or anyone else from discovering that he is living alone, so that he doesn't fall into the clutches of Child Protective Services or some other officials. And, in addition to all of his other problems, he seems somehow to be having the killer's, that is, Christian's, dreams. The stories are interwoven, moving from one of the three characters to another, sometimes from one paragraph to the next. This can be a bit confusing until you get into the rhythm of the book, which then becomes totally captivating and impossible to put down. This is a beautifully written novel about three men of varying ages adjusting to the solitude and changing circumstances of their lives, and it's one that will almost certainly stay with the reader for a long time to come. Next up is something completely different. The Secret of Shadow Ranch by Carolyn Keene. Published in 1931, this is the fifth novel in the Nancy Drew series. As the book opens, Nancy arrives in Phoenix, Arizona, eagerly looking forward to a fun-filled vacation at Shadow Ranch, but she abruptly finds herself involved in a baffling mystery. The ranch is being haunted by a phantom horse and is being maliciously damaged by an unknown enemy. Local people believe that the ghostly animal is carrying out the curse of Dirk Valentine, a romantic outlaw who was killed many years ago at Shadow Ranch, where he had gone to fulfill a promise to his sweetheart. The ranch, which is now owned by friends of Nancy's family, is in danger of going out of business as a result of all of these problems. Nancy suspects that a treasure hidden by Valentine may be at the root of the Shadow Ranch mystery, and so begins an effort to unravel it all, along with the help of a couple of her young friends. Inevitably, as the story progresses, Nancy will wind up in danger and in trouble, but it gives away nothing to say that in the end, Nancy will almost certainly come through in triumph and live to solve a long-running series of additional mysteries. This is a book that should appeal to large numbers of younger readers, and those of you listening who want to introduce your children or grandchildren to the world of crime fiction might find this or another book in the Nancy Drew series an excellent place to start. Let's turn next to Double Wide, a great book by Leo W. Banks. The protagonist of the novel is Prospero Whip Stark. Stark's father is a Shakespeare scholar, hence the name. Dad is also in jail, awaiting trial on a murder charge, but that's another story altogether. Stark was once an up-and-coming phenom, pitching in the major leagues. But then he blew out his shoulder, and following surgery, his career never recovered. From there it was all downhill until he found himself in a Mexican jail doing time on drug charges. Now free and back home in the U.S., he's settled into an aging Airstream trailer, living the simple life in the desert outside of Tucson, Arizona. A handful of other misfits have joined him in the tiny community known as Double Wide, and Stark is the unofficial mayor of the settlement, watching over his charges. The town consists of a single main street, lined with dilapidated trailers, most of which are as downtrodden as the people living in them. Still, life in Double Wide is more or less copacetic, until one afternoon Stark comes home to discover that someone has left a box on his porch step. In the box is a severed human hand, and from the tattoo on the back of the hand, Stark recognizes it as a hand that was once attached to the arm of his former catcher, a man named Rolando Molina. The last time Stark saw Molina, the man had developed a serious cocaine addiction and was entering treatment. Stark assumes naturally that his friend is dead. He's very angry about it, and he's determined to discover what might have happened to Molina. He's also determined to recover the body so that Molina's family can give him a decent burial. Stark strongly suspects that Molina's death is connected to a cartel that's running drugs through an old mining camp up on nearby Paradise Mountain. Up until now, the people in Double Wide and the drug runners have generally ignored each other, but Stark will now stir things up considerably. During the course of his investigation, Stark will become entangled with vicious and dangerous drug runners, money launderers, baseball players, aspiring sports agents, strippers, and a sexy former stripper who's become a television news reporter named Roxanne Santa Cruz. Roxanne will join Stark in his crusade, and by the time it's all over, only the strong, wily, and smart will survive to see the end of the tale. This is a very entertaining debut novel, with a cast of offbeat characters and a great lead protagonist in Whip Stark. It's by turns scary and funny, the dialogue is great, and the story moves along at just the right pace. A veteran Arizona journalist, Banks knows the territory well, and the setting is vividly described. You can feel the desert heat burning into your skin, and the monsoon rains pelting down so hard that a person can't see 3 feet ahead into the night. The story's various threads all come together in a great climax, and this is another book that should appeal to a broad audience. Finally, in this episode, let's look at Bury Me Deep, a novel by Megan Abbott. This book is based on the true story of Winnie Judd, a woman who committed perhaps the most infamous crime in the history of Arizona. In 1931, Judd was accused of murdering two of her female friends in the dispute over the affections of a local businessman and philanderer named Jack Halloran, who had befriended all three of the women. Judd then allegedly packed the bodies of her two victims into a couple of trunks, dismembering one of them in order to make it fit. She then shipped the trunks by train from Phoenix to Los Angeles. Judd was ultimately arrested, tried, and convicted for committing one of the murders, and she was sentenced to death. But the death sentence was vacated after Judd was determined to be mentally insane. She was committed to a state mental hospital, but over the years she managed to escape several times, and on one occasion stayed free for 6 years. Finally, she was paroled in 1971 and died in 1998 at the age of 93. In Abbott's fictional account, the protagonist is an attractive young woman named Marion Seeley, the naive daughter of a minister from Michigan. Marion has married a doctor several years her senior, but it turns out that the doctor is a drug addict, and he loses his license to practice medicine. He is thus forced to take a job working for a mining company in Mexico, where having a license is apparently not critical to his employment as the company doctor. While there, he promises Marion that he will kick his drug habit and he will return in a few months so that they can live happily ever after. In the meantime, he leaves Marion alone in a desert community that is never identified, but which we obviously assume to be the Phoenix of 1931. Marion gets a job at a medical clinic and takes a room at a boarding house. Alone and lonely, she is befriended by two young women, one of whom is a nurse at the clinic where Marion works. Marion soon falls under the influence of these women, who spend their evenings entertaining local businessmen. The attractive young Marion is seduced by a local civic leader, a philanderer named Joe Lanigan, and her life rapidly disintegrates. Marion ultimately gets into a terrible fight about Joe with her two friends, Louise and Ginny. A tragic accident is compounded by a vicious murder, and Marion finds herself in a hopeless predicament from which there would appear to be no recovery. This is not a crime novel in the usual sense, although there are plenty of crimes committed during the course of the story. The characters, Marion in particular, are extremely well drawn, and the reader watches in horror as her innocence is taken and her life is destroyed. It takes a while for the story to gather momentum, but once it does, it moves along like a runaway train. The reader understands that the train is about to go over a very high cliff, but you can't look away from the carnage that will result. This is ultimately a gripping story set against the backdrop of the Great Depression, in a world where attractive young women like Marion Seeley are often simply the playthings of wealthy and powerful men. Like all of Abbott's books, this one is a very good read. Thanks for listening. That's all for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and in the third podcast in this series, we'll consider several more of the most entertaining crime novels set in Arizona.